You got to start small.
I have not allowed being a woman to hold me back.
Credibility is not just making money, it's about making sure that people trust what you're doing.
Law practice is not only about going to court, it's about advice.
It's very difficult to hire somebody who's not motivated and then make them motivated.
One of the things that I'm known for is integrity.
They have to see you as a person of integrity.
Right.
Welcome to the Executive Lounge, your business thought leadership show that brings you the nuggets of insights from the experiences and life and work of men and women who have scaled the daunting heights of starting their own businesses or growing and managing businesses across the country, continent, and around the world. My guest today is a man whose name is synonymous with making great photography, and he's embarked on an audacious journey where he's evolved from doing photography the way we all know it, be it product photography or portraits of famous people, to telling the African story. We're going to learn a whole new perspective to this man, Steve Ababio. Welcome to the Executive Lounge.
Thank you very much, Ishra.
So, I've seen a lot of your work, and it speaks volumes of you. But you're this very quiet, unassuming guy, always in your trademark baseball cap, hiding from everyone. How do you get to do great work and keep a low profile?
Well, I'm flattered by your description. Thank you very much for that. But I entered photography in the beginning as a wedding photographer. And back then, I don't know about now, but then it was important as a wedding photographer to essentially be a fly on the wall, to not be seen or heard, so that you could most effectively capture what was going on around you. Because the minute people see you or know that you're around, they stop being natural, they start to pose, all kinds of things take place, which is not what I was trying to capture. So I guess you learn to keep a low profile in a job like that.
So you transitioned from doing wedding photography. What other kinds of photography did you do along the way?
Well, I transitioned from doing wedding photography into corporate photography, shooting for annual reports and websites. I do a lot of food photography, do a lot of product photography, and a lot of travel and adventure photography as well.
How did that part of your repertoire take off, the travel and adventure? I'm very curious to learn about that.
Well, I personally like to travel. I enjoy being on the road. I am an adventurous person. I will go anywhere. I will stay under any conditions. I will eat anything. And it helped that I could carry a camera along and capture some of what I saw. And I think I would say that I got that from my dad. My dad used to travel a lot. He always had a good camera with him. I guess he couldn't afford at the time to take all of us with him. He had 6 children. So when he would travel and come back, we would get to go along with him from the prints that he would bring back with him. So it was, we were traveling vicariously through his photographs. And I suppose that kind of rubbed off on me.
Wonderful. Now, for someone who travels and with your experience, doing travel and adventure photography, and the recent project that you started, the initiative Destination Africa.
Yes.
What inspired it, first of all?
Well, first of all, I would say that travel around the world gives you an idea of the things that take place in different countries, the things that people make money from, people make businesses out of. And then you come to Africa and travel, and you see things that ideally should be improving the livelihoods of the people close to them, and yet you find abject poverty. I think in 2008 or so, myself, Emmanuel Bobier, and Nana Kwame Akwa, we took a road trip around Ghana, and for a week we were in a car together, just traveling from place to place. And that's when it hit me that there is absolutely no reason why we should be a poor country. There's none. This is a beautiful country. apart from the natural resources that everybody talks about, gold, bauxite, cocoa, and all of that aside, there's still, if we didn't have any of that, there's still no reason why we should be poor, because the resources are just mind-boggling. I mean, and it's just there, and we do absolutely nothing about it.
So you see, your friend Nana Kofi Akko actually does make this statement quite often, that we are sitting on thrones of gold and we're begging for brass. Let me dive into the heritage, culture, tourism subsector. Okay. From what you're saying, my understanding is that it has a great deal of potential to transform our lives, our economy, and impact on people.
It does.
Share with us some of your thoughts on that, based on the places you've been and what you've seen.
Well, based on the places I've been and what I've seen, you see, the thing is, I think we often think too big. We often scare ourselves into inaction, as it were, because some of the simplest things could be turned into, for example, let me give you just one example. If you have a farm, let's say you have a rice farm, there are people in this country, and I say in this country because a lot of my focus has been on getting Africans, getting Ghanaians, to travel within Africa and within Ghana, because in a lot of cases, we know streets in England, we know neighborhoods, we are proud of the places we can mention, but you can't mention anywhere in the next region to where you come from. So my focus has been on encouraging us to explore our own backyard. And I would, for example, be happy to pay a certain amount of money to spend time in a little guest house on a rice farm, just to explore, how does this thing work? How do you grow rice? Or somebody may have a cattle ranch. If you had a little, it doesn't have to be anything extraordinary, a room with a bed, could be an outdoor shower or something, somewhere where one could bath, and somewhere to eat locally, and that's it. I would pay money to go stay there for a couple of days, even just to get away from the hustle and bustle of the city. All of that is tourism, and all of that is a means of earning money aside from what the main business is. So there are all kinds of little opportunities that we overlook, because when we think tourism, we think big hotels, we think parks, we think attractions, and so on and so forth. But the field is so much wider than we give it credit for.
Who do you think missold the concept of tourism to us?
I really don't know, because I can't say it's the foreigners, because when you travel to foreign places, they take advantage of every little thing. I mean, everything is a tourism opportunity. You would have tours, for example, you have tours of the White House. Why don't we have tours that take money for Flagstaff House? Do we have tours of the Osu Castle? I mean, for example, you go to Jamestown, and emblazoned on the lighthouse, photography is strictly prohibited. I'm like, why in the world would you prohibit photography of an icon like a lighthouse that is situated in Jamestown? People take pictures anyway. But what's the sign even there for? What's the idea behind it? So I think to a certain extent, I would say that we do it to ourselves.
You've been on this initiative, Destination Africa. You've traveled across the continent extensively. And I know that you're a very soft-spoken person, but this is one thing that gets you quite animated. How should we be looking at bridging the gap? I mean, we say we can punch above our weight. We say we have everything it takes to make things, great things happen. But we've been singing this song for so long.
Well, I think it takes a multifaceted approach. And I think it will take some deliberation. And primarily, above all things, it needs leadership. It needs leadership that understands the fact that tourism isn't just a buzzword. From where I stand, I feel that it has pretty much the biggest potential for poverty alleviation in this country. It has far more potential, in my opinion, than any aid program, than any donor arranged, program or whatever it is that we do to say we're doing poverty alleviation. And I say this because in any given community, I mean, most of the communities that have tourist attractions in this country are quite deprived. And that is because we haven't taken the time to build structures around those. And when I say structures, I don't mean buildings. I'm talking about systems that inure to the benefit of the people that live around these places. And when I talk about systems, for example, sanitation.
Yeah.
Let me break down cleanliness. Unfortunately, one of the biggest things that I notice as a photographer is the filth. I mean, it's crazy and it's unavoidable. And that's one of the first things that we need to tackle, because if we're talking about attracting people to places, you don't want to attract them to some place where they're in a hurry to get out of there because there's just so much around that shouldn't be there. And it's funny because then it interconnects into so many other different areas. The filth is a problem, but the filth is also an opportunity. So what we need, I guess, is thinking that is interconnected to know how to create structures that take a problem, make an opportunity out of it, thereby solving two things at the same time. So you are creating a better environment for tourism to take place, but you're also utilizing that which was creating the problem to generate income on another side. So at the end of the day, you're getting income from your tourism and you're getting income from solving the problem that existed that was preventing it before.
The stuff you just said indicates that, you know, there are two key components, you know, beyond the leadership, you know, narrative. We need systems.
Yes.
And the people need to understand their role in all of this.
Yes.
Borrowing from the parallels of traveling across Ghana and across Africa and around the world, what are the lessons you think we ought to start looking at as pointers to change our own, you know, first for the people's own paradigm shift, and what structures we should be having in place to ensure that this big slice of over $7.6 trillion around the world, we are cutting ourselves a nice, juicy, healthy portion?
I think that having traveled around, one of the key things that strikes me, just looking at certain places that appear to have succeeded versus those that are still struggling, is that leadership is key, and leadership needs to be firm. I think one of the issues that we have is that we have laws, we have all the structures, we have certain structures, but we don't enforce anything. And so because we don't enforce anything, everything happens anyhow, because people will do what you inspect, not what you expect. So change is hard. Change takes time. Change takes effort. Change requires leadership. So we ourselves, and those of us in leadership positions, need to be able to understand that in order to change something, you're going to go through a phase where you will be despised, you will be disliked, you will be hated, because you are making people do things differently from what they're used to doing. But if you understand the end result of what that enforcement of change is supposed to achieve, then you basically need to set your forehead like flint and begin to push it through. What's happening in a lot of cases, I feel, is that political leadership thinks it's a popularity contest. So as soon as I start to do something that's going to bring change, when I get a bit of blowback, I kind of pedal back and relax and let the people do what they want, which may work for a time, but at the end of the day, you came in, you stayed for a while, and you didn't leave any legacy because you let the people, you know, go ahead. And the truth of the matter is that sometimes people do what's easiest for them, not necessarily what's the best for them. So if you want to bring about, you know, if we want to bring about a difference in what needs to happen, we need to understand that some things we need to put our foot down and just push through, regardless of what the consequences may be. Which is why if I were to, I would say that if I was a politician and I got elected into power, I would do all the unpopular things within the first year and a half. I would do the things they would hate me most for, the things I need to clear up, the things I need to move out. Because the truth of the matter is that by the second to third year, the benefits of those decisions will start to become clear. By the fourth year, they'll be clapping for you and hailing you and voting you back into power again. But the key thing is to be able to do the things at the right time so that by the time it gets to your 4th year, you're reaping the benefits.
Have we as a people lost out on the opportunities of what this wonderful country has to offer in time past because we don't appreciate it? Do we even know what we have?
I don't think we know what we have, and that probably also maybe is a result of education, it's a result of a lack of exposure at a certain level, and so on and so forth. I wouldn't say we've lost out because it's not too late, but we are losing out if we don't do anything about our current state. The thing about tourism is that tourism feeds education. The more you travel, the more you discover, the more you get to know. It helps to expand the mind because you see what other people are doing. You get to interact with other cultures, and this applies. I'm not talking about somebody coming from another continent. I'm talking about within our own country, because if I travel from the Ashanti region to the central region or even the western region, there are certain things that they do differently. There are certain traditions that they have that I would learn about, that I will come into contact with, which I might find beneficial to what I do, and vice versa. So there's so much we get to learn, by moving around our own country ourselves. So the opportunity is there. And if we do the work that is necessary and build the structures, I think that we're kind of far down the line, but it's not too late. It's not too late at all.
You are optimistic that it will change?
Well, I'm optimistic that if enough of us take action, it will change.
Okay. Well, on that note, we're going to take our short break, and when we come back from these messages, we'll tell you more. I'm sure we'll learn a little more about Steve's, sometimes the glass is half full or sometimes it's half empty. We'll test that optimism in a moment. This is the Executive Lounge. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Executive Lounge with me, Inshira Ado, and my guest, Steve Ababio. He's a photographer, an adventurer, and a man who's passionate about travel. So, Steve, you talked about, your road trip with Emmanuel Bobie and Nana Kofi Akwa across the country. You have a team you're traveling with now across the continent. Yes. You've seen things in Ghana. You've seen things around the continent. And do we even appreciate what we have? Is the support from the center that makes the entire value chain tick present here compared to the other places you've seen?
Well, it's an interesting question, because what we've discovered is that from the political side, there isn't that much interest or engagement. We tend to get a lot more help, a lot more understanding, a lot more support from the business side of things. And they, of course, have their issues and challenges, when it comes to issues like tariffs and so on and so forth that impact on their business. But the business side of things tend to appreciate what we do, because they see it from their standpoint, is that, we need more people to find out that we're here and that we do this and that we have these facilities and so on and so forth. So they really connect with the Destination Africa project when it comes to that. We are hoping that as we do more and more work, it will become abundantly clear to the political side of the equation that there is really a lot of value in looking at what we do and support, because at the end of the day, we're promoting every business, every tourism related something is situated in a country. So when the promotion is for that place, the country benefits ultimately. And we do more than one location or destination in any given country.
Okay, let's borrow from something I recently read, and it's the thing about standardization.
Yeah.
You know that Ghana is quite often described as this land where we're all very friendly people, but then the big concern that you'll always hear is that we have poor customer service. Now, how do we bridge the gap? How do we ensure that when I'm giving this beautiful imagery of a country, the experience matches my expectation? Standardization, is that a way to go, and how can we achieve it?
It absolutely is, and standardization, it comes from training. It has to be deliberate. It's not something that happens by chance. I feel that it's unfortunate that as Ghanaians we have believed the myth that Ghanaians are very friendly people, very welcoming and open and so on and so forth. That may be to a certain extent to foreigners, but all you have to do is to drive in traffic and cut off somebody and find out how really friendly and welcoming we are. It's a myth. The truth of the matter is that we are real people with real problems. People have issues. So somebody has a problem at home, the water wasn't running, or had no electricity, and they show up at work. They will show up at work with a bad attitude, and you're going to have that attitude impinge on the kind of customer service that they give. We need a certain level of standardization where the training, especially in the hospitality industry, is, and you see what standardization and centralized training also does, is now it makes clear what the bar is, so that you can really adequately judge between who's performing well and who's not. I had an interesting situation where we visited Zanzibar, and we had a couple of tour guides, really young guys in their early 20s, who took us on tours through the various places, Stone City and so on and so forth. But the most intriguing thing was not the places that they took us, but the fact, and I was on the bus with, a lot of, let me just say, grown-ups. I mean, people who are in their 60s and above. And what was interesting to me was the fact that these two young men in their 20s could hold consistent, intelligent conversations on any topic you could bring up, be it geopolitics, be it the weather, be it change of tides or whatever it was. These young men could hold a consistent, intelligent conversation with every single person in the bus. One of the elderly men asked them, "Wow, how do you know so much?" And the young man told him that it's due to the training that we were put through. Once Zanzibar decided that tourism was going to be one of their major earners, they established a tourism institute. So these young men had actually dropped out of secondary school, one because his parents could no longer pay for his education, and he went through to this institute. He now speaks 4 languages and is a very successful tour guide. So training has a direct correlation with the level and quality of customer service that we're able to deliver.
Inherent in that story is the importance of a vision, and a plan, putting in the place the policies that ensure that this grand plan of making maybe Ghana a destination for everyone is realized. An institute was set up for all of this.
Exactly.
Do we not, don't we have great plans too here? And why are we not able to do these things?
Well, I can't speak to most of those things, but what I would say, at least from my perspective, from what I do, is it's one thing to have a plan. It's another thing to operationalize the plan. You have to have the steps that will put the plan into action. Because having the plan is one thing. Talking about the plan is another thing. Putting the plan into action, that's where the real work is. And I feel that a lot of the time, we have the plans, we talk about the plans, but nobody ever takes the step to put the plans into action. And that's probably where we are falling short.
So when you travel to a country,
yes,
you're most likely going to learn a lot from the taxi driver that picks you up from the airport. How important is that first encounter for you
Well, it depends. It depends on the country, because in some of the countries that we go, we don't understand a word of of the language that they speak. So sometimes the person who picks us up also may not speak our language. So depending on where it is and how well we are able to communicate, it may or may not have an effect. These days, that's becoming less and less of an issue because of technology. I mean, now I can walk into a restaurant in a country where I don't speak the language, and I will type what I want to type into my device. Google Translate will convert it into the language. I show it to the waiter. They read it. They type back, and we have a conversation. I mean, we can even have a humorous conversation, on that basis. So it depends on the set of circumstances. But I always go anywhere with an open mind. I go with a sense of optimism. And I feel that when you go expecting good things tend to happen.
So, Steve, if you weren't Ghanaian, would you be in a rush to travel to Ghana?
It's hard to say because it would depend on what kind of information I had about Ghana, what kind of information is available on Ghana, what kind of imagery is available on Ghana. And that is also key. Well, I guess it's also funny because for me as a photographer, I do a lot based on the imagery I see. I've traveled to a particular country several times because the initial imagery I saw, the imagery was poor, but I could see the beauty and the potential that country had. So I took a decision to go there to see whether what I thought was correct, and it was. So depending on what the imagery is and what the output of that country is, I just might.
Wow. Now, I like the response that it depends on the imagery you see, the potential that you see. Has there been enough projection of Ghana's image out there?
I don't think there's any such thing as enough. If you're talking about promoting a country, that's a very competitive space. And so other countries are aggressively and cohesively presenting their countries and what they do and reasons why you should come there. And these things are important because today's tourist is tomorrow's business person, just in the same way today's business person is tomorrow's tourist. And business and tourism is business in any way. So whoever comes there is a source of income on several different levels for any given country. So you have to be presenting yourself consistently and frequently and in a qualitative manner, to get people coming in. Destination Africa began because we believe that Africans or African countries are not presenting, or most African countries, not all, are not presenting themselves in a qualitative manner so as to attract the kinds of... In fact, I believe that a lot of Africans don't travel within Africa because our images are not enticing enough. So they will travel, they will go and spend money in other continents, but not as much in Africa. We want to change that.
It's a remarkable observation to make that Africans don't travel across Africa. And I have been to a few African countries. Sometimes the perception, the stereotypes that we have of each other get in the way. But once you've made the journey, then you see a whole new light, a whole new image of the country. How important is the branding that a country can undertake impact on tourism and the acceptance of it as a destination for people?
The branding is critical. The branding is critical, but you see, we should also move beyond the point where we think that branding is something that happens at the top. Because a brand is not just a logo or a certain visual image. A brand is a whole chain of things, that takes place. So if you say you are one thing and we come and find out the reality is another thing, that other thing adversely affects the brand you are trying.
So define the promise and stick to it.
Exactly. So define the promise and make sure that you're sticking to it, or make sure that the promise you're defining is a realistic one. You have to look at yourself, do the analysis of yourself, and know where you're strong, know where you're weak, know what your opportunities are, know what your threats are, and position yourself, realistically. Because even if you want to change certain things, you have to be accepting of the fact that it won't change overnight. So try to not oversell when you know very well in certain instances that some things will fall short. So focus on your strengths, work on your weaknesses, but make sure that the brand lives up to what you're selling. So branding is important, but you have to make sure that it's not a disappointment.
The story we tell the world about our nation, lately we've been spending quite a bit of money on international networks trying to sell the country. Is that money well spent?
Well, I can't, in all honesty, speak to that because I don't know what the statistics are. I don't know what, the results. I don't know if it's being tracked.
But you know the reality on the ground.
Well,
we're inviting people into our home. Do you think the home is ready to receive visitors?
I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done. We also can't say that we're waiting for all the work to be done before we say people should come, come visit and come see. For all you know, some of them will come with ideas that will help us, leapfrog certain stages and get the work done faster. So as for come, let them come. But we also do need to do the work, and we need to start doing the work. I mean, for me personally, one of the biggest things that I'm passionate about is plastic waste. We need to fix that. Just a couple of days, we're driving by the beach somewhere in Accra, and it's almost as though there's more plastic than sand on the beach. In other countries, the beaches are a gold mine. I mean, that's where you make the most money from, tourism activities. In Accra, it's the opposite. That's where we do, excuse me to say, unpalatable bodily functions. And that shouldn't be the case. And Accra this is the capital. I mean, if this is the capital, imagine what it says about the rest of the country. Even though the fact of the matter is that the capital is actually not a good example of the rest of the country.
Okay. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be back with more on the Executive Lounge after these. Welcome back to the Executive Lounge with me, Inshira Addo, and my guest, Steve Ababio of Destination Africa. Now, Steve, you've seen a lot of places where, I follow your Instagram feed, and I see pictures that just make you dream of wanting to see places. These things were not happenstance. They weren't achieved by chance. But underneath all of that is a vibrant economy that's changing lives, providing jobs and things. Like the story of these two young people you talked about, the tour guides. How can we harness tourism as a catalyst for economic growth in Ghana? Well,
there are several ways we can harness tourism. I think that first and foremost, we need to appreciate that it's a serious source of income and livelihood for people. We need to look at it holistically and understand how can we grow this sector. I know that in Kenya, I believe there's a system in place where, for example, if you are Kenyan, if you're local, you pay less during low seasons, I think, for hotels and attractions and so on and so forth. And the specific point of that is you get more Kenyans traveling within Kenya, because I think that at the end of the day, you get much more from local tourism, from domestic tourism, than you do from external tourism if you build the local tourism.
If tourism is such a low-hanging fruit, it's evident we've not done as much as we could do with it. What aspects of our tourism do you think we could be tapping into? We've had the Jollof fight with everybody in the sub-region, but I mean, where really can we start?
Where can we start? Well, for starters, we could make it easier to come into the country. We could make it less expensive. For example, I go to Sao Tome and Principe, which I do often, and as a foreigner, as a visitor, I pay $30 for the visa. I want to bring my Santomean friends to Ghana, but they are expected to pay $150 for the visa. I think that's not encouraging. Another example is Rwanda, which last month, even before that, they were doing visa on arrival, so you could just hop on a plane and go and pay for the visa when you get there. Now they've even scrapped that. So you can hop on a plane and get there, and for your first 2 weeks, you don't even need a visa to get in, you know, as an African. So I think that for us, the first step is make it easier for people to come. I mean, when they get here, they are going to spend money, so make it easier for them to get in. And then when they get in, make it easier for them to stay. I think that our hotel prices are on the high side. If you take any given visitor who's from outside of Ghana and they have options about where to go, you can take a look at Ghana, look at the pricing, take a look at South Africa, look at the pricing, and invariably, the pricing is lower in South Africa. What you get for the money is more in South Africa. And that's I don't know that we see it as a problem, but we should. We really should see that as a problem and find out ways to fix it. But because the fact of the matter is that we are in competition with everybody else.
So we need to make it easy for people to come in. We need to look at our pricing. Anything else you think we ought to focus on?
There are a whole raft of things that we need to focus on. As we've talked about before, standardization, because, you know, customer service, that's the thing that makes people, you know, want to come back. Because if the customer service isn't great, you know, I'm not going to want to come back. Cleanliness, I mean, I can't emphasize it enough. Cleanliness is a big deal. It really is a big deal. If I'm going to want to go back to a country, there has to be a reason. It's either, it can't be because you're a sucker for punishment. It has to be because of something positive that the country is doing. So cleanliness is key. We have lots of great attractions, attractions that should be doing far better than they are doing. A good example is the forts and the castles. As far as I can tell, there are only a few castles which are working at optimum. Elmina Castle, Cape Coast Castle, there are a whole number of really beautiful forts along the coast, which in my opinion could be doing a whole lot, but they're sitting in ruins. You know, if you're feeling adventurous, you know, you go and wander around one or the other, but they're really not benefiting their communities or the nation in any other way. So there's a lot we should be doing in that area as well.
What must we do by way of stimulation to get Ghanaians to travel within Ghana and sample our rich culture and heritage?
Well, I suppose that the answer to that question is what Destination Africa is doing. We believe that Africans don't travel in Africa because we haven't shown them where there is to go and what there is to do. What they see is enticing images of Disney World, they see enticing images of London, enticing images of Paris, enticing images from everywhere else, but, you know, except Africa. Unfortunately, I think that most of the hotels and so on and so forth, they're so heavily taxed that they find it hard to, you know, put advertising spend in terms of creating the sorts of compelling images that will make a difference. Because with tourism, it really is about the imagery. It's about seeing a place and wanting to go there. And so we believe that, well, yes, we understand what the challenges are, but we also believe that change will begin to come if we travel within our own backyard, if Africans travel within Africa, if Ghanaians travel within Ghana. So we're going into these places and we are creating the images. We are hoping to, by doing enough, begin to build up enough of a groundswell that other people will also keep doing it. And we will get the support to do more and go wider till we're at the point where we are building up a very formidable library of the different places there are to go, the different things there are to do, and the different opportunities. So it's not just about leisure, but it's also about what are the business opportunities within that sector. Because an African is more likely to take up, a business within Africa than somebody from outside if you show it to them right.
It's quite interesting that you talk about what Destination Africa wants to achieve as a catalyst for local tourism on the continent as well as within specific countries, especially Ghana's case. But you're known for photography, but there's some videography element to a lot of what you're doing lately. How did that transition happen?
Well, video is basically a bunch of photographs strung together and run through very fast. So it still falls within, the ambit of photography. But we've shifted a lot to video because photography is great, but we find that in today's environment and with technology and everything, video tends to engage people more quickly, more readily, and it gives them, I guess, more of a picture. A picture, they say, is worth 1,000 words. But video is a whole bunch of pictures strung together. So it's 1,000 words times however many frames of video you're able to
So you
show.
have a chance to tell a story
into a bit more detail.
A million words.
Exactly.
If you could do that.
Exactly.
Wonderful. Now, what do you do to relax?
What do I do to relax? I swim.
Okay.
I swim, I read, but mostly I swim.
Why? That's interesting. Look, I know this is a conversation that could have gone on and on and on and on and on for a while, but I think this is all time would allow us for an engagement on the Executive Lounge. And I'd like to say a big thank you to you for spending time with us.
Thank you for having me.
So my 5 takeouts from today's conversation with Steve Ababio is very simply these. That number 1, there are opportunities all around us, and if you do not travel, you limit the frontiers of your imagination. You may travel by physically moving, or you can travel vicariously by looking at photographs or videos that have been compiled about destinations and about cultures and about people. That's how you broaden the frontiers of your own existence and knowledge. Number 2 is to have an appreciation of what the future holds. Steve steps out and goes on adventures with an open mind. And that's because he believes that something good will come out of it. So whatever it is that you find yourself doing, have an open mind about it and step forward with confidence. And the third thing is that learn. Okay? Learning is about observing the things that are happening around you, wherever you may be. There are the wealth of expertise and experience that he's been able to share, the insights that he's shared with us, is because he's paid attention to what's happening here at home, across the continent, and in different places that he has seen. So the value that you carry with you is going to be based on how much valuable input you've made into yourself. So learning is definitely one way to do that. The fourth thing I am taking away from this conversation, I hope you do too, is that always seek to do things at the top. Steve was driven by the desire to tell the world that Africa is not as poor as people would like to make it look. So he's taking photographs that represent the continent very well. That's living the dream at its highest level. And the final thing I would like to share with you as my takeout is simply this, that Africa is a beautiful continent and you should see it. Travel, see the world, especially Africa. Travel within the continent. In spite of all the challenges that we may have, we will be able to get over those. Thank you so much for joining us on the Executive Lounge. Thank you for coming to the show, Steve.
Thank you again for having me.
For you, thank you for watching, and we look forward to having you again very soon. As always, go forward, make rain. Shalom.